Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Kwok.
And I'm Angela Kelley.
And we have a presentation for you today that will talk a little bit about the least restrictive environment and special education services. This session will describe the importance of offering students with disabilities a wide range of special education services.
A well-developed IEP aligns all components within the IEP. Assessments drive appropriate present levels. Goals are developed to address areas of weakness. Instruction is delivered. Students move closer to the access of grade-level curriculum.
On this particular diagram, we have the general education curriculum and an acknowledgement of how every aspect of the IEP aligns within itself, because once an assessment is developed, it helps drive the goals. The present levels identify the areas of need and strengths to develop appropriate goals based on the student's information of strengths and needs. And then the instruction can be geared toward that area of goals that have been identified by the team. When the team is considering placement decisions, each least restrictive environment is a decision that is made individually for each specific student. When we're looking at IEPs, we want to make sure that the school is looking at a wide range of services for each student specifically, because it is inappropriate that every student would have the same type of service delivery. Each service delivery is specific to the needs of that student. The least restrictive environment is the appropriate balance of settings and services to meet the student's individual needs. The district should have an array of services and a continuum of educational setting options available to meet the individual least restrictive environment needs of each student.
Regardless of placement, the student will be given appropriate access to the general education curriculum as determined by the IEP team. To the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled. LRE is conceptually easy to understand, but it's difficult to implement. LRE is essentially about educating children with disabilities in an environment with age-appropriate peers.
On this slide, we have the need for services. The need for services is determined by the IEP team, and that's the Individualized Education Program team. That determination of services are those that are required for the student to advance towards attaining the annual goals that have been identified. Also, the services are appropriate to help the student participate and progress in general education and participate with non-disabled peers. Special education services not only include those that are directly related to the disability, but they could include related services that help the student as a whole benefit from the special education program.
Explanation of services is when each child's IEP includes descriptions regarding special education services, related services, supplemental aids and services, program modifications, and supports for personnel.
Within the section of OK Ed Plan, the slide that you see now addresses each one of these areas. So it addresses special education services, a section for related services, a separate section for supplementary aids and services, and also an additional area for program modifications and supports for personnel. And the reason that those areas are so important is because those are required components under the Individual Disability Education Act, or IDEA. In OK Ed Plan, if you are in an individual student's file, there's a section within the IEP process entitled Services. That specific area required for components to include on an IEP required under IDEA is included in the Services section.
There are 4 IEP service models. An IEP team selects the options for the services in the type of collaboration, co-teaching, monitoring, or direct instruction, as seen on your screen.
And we're going to take a moment to describe each one of those four areas in more detail. The first one is monitoring. The student receives primary instruction from a general education teacher. The special education teacher monitors the performance of the student in the least restrictive environment to ensure appropriate access to the curriculum and progress is made toward the student's annual IEP goals. And the next option of service type, the option is available for collaboration. In this model, the student receives primary instruction from a general education teacher, and then the special education teacher, he or she reinforces the direct instruction of the general education curriculum. This may occur inside or outside of the general education classroom.
Co-teaching. The student receives primary instruction from both a general education teacher and a special education teacher within the general education classroom. Teachers have an equal partnership in the responsibility. And the last service type is direct instruction. The student receives primary instruction from a highly qualified special education teacher outside the general education classroom.
In the student's IEP section of the IEP process, in that area identified as Services section, there is a drop-down for the location of the services. This is both for special education services and related services. The location of services can include correctional facility, home or hospital setting, parentally placed private school, public-private residential, public-private separate day school, general education setting, and finally, special education setting. At the conclusion of our WebEx today, we will be addressing the entire range of services and looking at this particular model of options that can be considered as highly important, and we'll go into more detail in a little bit.
Least restrictive environment. In every IEP, the IDEA requires a, number one, description of the extent, if any, the student will not participate in general education, description of the continuum of placement, determination of the amount of time in general education setting, and any modifications or accommodations that would be needed.
Once each individual service has been determined by the IEP team, and that includes related services as well, that IEP team identifies the total amount from all services that the student is receiving. The team will determine the total amount of time the student is removed from the general education setting. And this is the LRE calculation. It's the extent that the student is removed from his or her general education setting. I have an additional note here that the extended school year services, there's a separate area for any kind of services that are determined by the team to be administered outside the regular school day. Those can be considered extended school year services, and that can include any services offered during fall, spring break, after school hours, before school hours, or winter or summer break.
Settings. Regular class full-time can be a monitored support from special education staff. Part-time special ed, full-time special ed, shortened day, homebound services, and other placements including hospital, institutions, or residential facilities or special schools.
In addition to the identified special education services, the team can consider related services that are related to the student's primary disability. Those related services can include speech-language therapy, transportation, audiology services, counseling services, sign language, occupational therapy or physical therapy, school nurse services, or social work services. In a previous slide, we identified that some services may occur outside the regularly scheduled school day. In an example of counseling services, some districts may ask whether counseling services should be put on the IEP, whether the student is receiving counseling services, yes or no. And the decision is made by the IEP team based on whether the school will be the responsible party of offering those specific services. If counseling services occur during a regularly scheduled school day, are offered by a school district to address that student's disability, counseling services would be a direct service as a related service on the student's IEP. If counseling services are provided by mom or dad, not provided on behalf of the school district, and occur outside the regular school day, that will not be a related service on the IEP. It could be identified as a service that is occurring in the comment section or the parents' notes section that this student is receiving the service. However, that service is not a service that is being provided on behalf of the school district.
Transportation. The IEP team must consider the student's disability, how it affects his or her need for transportation, including determining whether the student's disability prevents the student from using the same transportation provided to students without disabilities, or from getting to school in the same manner as a student without disabilities. Other services include special assistance, as in an aid on the bus, safety restraints, child safety restraints and chairs, accommodations such as preferential seating, and training for the bus driver.
Within the IEP, on the services section, there's a specific area for services. There's a specific section for related services, an explanation of to what extent the student would be removed from his or her general education setting, and then there's an area for supplementary aids and services. Supplementary aids and services refer to aids, services, and other supports that are provided. They might include support for school staff, positive behavior intervention plans, or a BIP, provision of note takers, and supports for extracurricular or other non-academic activities. It's important to note that under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that all students with disabilities should have access to extracurricular activities. They should not be excluded just based on their disability. So this statement in the IEP acknowledges an area to what extent supports or services may be necessary to allow access for that student to participate in extracurricular activities. In conclusion, services require that IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, require a wide range of services for all students with disabilities. When you're considering an entire range of services, you want to make sure that the entire team is considering the need for special education services and whether or not they are necessary to address that student's disability. Once the IEP team determines that a need for special education services is required, then those services must be provided. That is a requirement. It's federal law. Those are required regardless of concerns over staffing or expense. So if you have a student that moves in and is substantially different than a different range of services than the current personnel are available, then either you need to consider with school staff hiring additional personnel or even working with other districts to help provide services that are required to meet that student's needs. And those needs and services are required regardless of the expense that may be incurred by providing those provisions for that student, whether that's assistive technology device, additional services, whether it's an aid. those services that the team has determined are necessary must be provided. And finally, rather than going through one extreme of a service type to another, and that's an example of homebound services, which is the most restrictive setting, to a general education setting without support, a wide range of service types should be considered. So in least restrictive environment, the team has an entire range of continuum that could be considered. On the one hand, you have a student that has been offered general education curriculum, and that student has not been successful because they have no support. The team has determined that that student has a disability, and the team has determined that services for special education are necessary to address that student's needs. In that particular context, the team should not immediately go to the option of homebound setting because that is one extreme. There is a wide range of continuum that can be considered by the entire IEP team that is definitely relevant to addressing that student's needs. First of all, this team should consider appropriate accommodations in the general education setting. You know, what is effective, what motivates the student, are there assistive technology devices that the student may need access to? So we're providing additional context for that student to access general education context in his or her general education setting. Beyond that, it might be offering a special education teacher to come into that general education classroom and provide additional support for either that student or for that classroom teacher to address that student's needs. Another option for a team to consider is whether that student is removed a portion of the school day to receive services in another setting, whether it's a special education setting, a specially designed instruction for speech-language impairment. So those type of services would be removed from the general education setting to deliver those type of services specifically. Those type of services where a student is removed can be a portion of the day. It could be, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It could be one period. It could be, a half day. It could be a full day. But the more that a student is removed from a general education setting, the more restrictive the environment is. For a student who has significant cognitive disabilities, that student may be removed from his or her general education setting for a large portion of the day, including maybe the entire day in a self-contained classroom. Understand that that environment is a little bit more restrictive than having the student receive services in a general education setting alone. The student could also receive services during a partial day. It could include maybe an hour less than general education students, a half day less. However, when a team is considering shortening a day for that specific student, the team must make recommendations on a plan of how that student will receive access to that general education setting and allowing him or her to make progress towards the goals and ultimately return back to that whole portion of the day as in the context of all other general education students. Finally, the team can consider the most restrictive environment, which is homebound services. But when we consider homebound services, we're looking at those students that may be medically fragile or have a health condition where homebound services are necessary. The most restrictive environment, such as a homebound setting, home hospital, correctional facility, those are the most restrictive settings, and so we do not want to see a student being removed specifically from a general education context all the way to a home or hospital setting without having a full range of continuum of services be considered. Our final slide has our contact information. If you have any questions about the content that we have addressed today, you can feel free to reach out to any one of us at the State Department. Our contact number is 405-521-3351, and we can certainly reach out to you and help answer any type of question related to services that you might have. I will make one additional note that this presentation will be posted on our State Department of Education website under Special Education Services, and will also be available on the main menu page of OK Ed Plan. At the very bottom of the section, there's a section called Documents. The tab under Documents has an option for State Resources. Click on that State Resources tab, and this PowerPoint and recorded webinar will be available on that tab. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.